All right, well, so I couldn't be more excited to be talking about the Cosmere RPG with you. This whole experience, even just talking about this with you today on camera, is a dream come true for me. But I'd like to take it back to the beginning of this project. And you've been hearing requests for years from fans for an RPG connecting the Cosmere. And I had some thoughts of what people might be looking for, but what were you asking for when we first sat down together?
Yeah, I remember that meeting and talking about it. You were glad I was a gamer, that I played some RPGs in the past. It's hard because we do a lot of board games, and I don't play a lot of board games. So I just got to trust people that the board games are good. Fortunately, I have plenty of people on my team. But RPGs, I have done so many systems and so many games. And I remember one of the main things I asked you was to make sure that we could balance combat and non-combat so that both were fun. I think this is partially because I've watched certain RPG systems move more and more combat-based and making it harder for me to do the goofy things that I love. I'm the guy who is a wizard and takes the shrink spell not to shrink his enemies, but to shrink like the door in its frame, or enlarge it so it gets stuck, or to shrink this so I can open it, or just use the magic in the ways that you're not supposed to. And that's gotten harder and harder in a lot of systems as I want everything to be viable outside of combat. That's not to say that every spell has to do things like that, but that was what my request to you was. Like, when people are in combat, make it crunchy and fun, and you get to move your pieces on the board, and you get to hit each other with swords, but make the non-combat as fun, and make it possible that you can make a non-combat focused character who can really have a lot of fun in an RPG.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I remember you talking about kind of that anecdote. Our first big kickoff with the larger team, and shrink the door was actually became a phrase that we referenced multiple times. And so we absolutely, I think, have done that because of how we've handled magic as being skill-based. That you've got a surge binding skill, you roll the d20 to...
You decide what you want to do.
And then you say, here's what I'm trying to do with it. And you can, that results in a lot more flexibility. I mean, we've had our Edge Dancer character that our original project lead, Anthony, played. He edge danced his way into, he surfed on a Skybreaker's back once. He slid into a Chasm Fiend to try to attack it from the inside. And it was...
Polar Drax, huh?
Yeah, he just really was able to do that and have it be completely fluid and not like, oh, the GM's sort of breaking the rules of the system because it's fun. But actually, like, that's how the system works. And yet, there's also those very crunchy aspects of being able to say, okay, if I want to use this particular power on this many enemies, how much damage is it going to do? The rules are there for those things, but then they're surrounded by this flexibility.
Another thing that I think we talked about was the idea that everybody should have something important to do in every part of a campaign. I've played too many games where it's like, all right, now the sneaky people go sneak, and everybody else goes and gets a snack. And what we want is just lots of different ways to engage with the gameplay so that your character may not be the focus right now, but they can always contribute.
Yeah, and enabling different play styles, I think, is so important because, we weren't just looking at Stormlight, right? We were looking at the Cosmere, and a favorite character of mine who I often came back to is just saying, okay, what is Steris in this world? I've been very passionate with the team about making sure that there is.
Can you play Steris?
Yeah, that there's a class, or what we call a path to play her, and there is. And Tress also has some levels in that path for sure. And so the character who is smart and makes plans, but who isn't necessarily hitting anybody upside the head is absolutely a viable character in this.
So the other thing that I remember us talking about that is a real challenge is I've played a lot of Rifts. Rifts is a famous crossover RPG where you were supposed to be able to take a ninja and have him fight a giant robot, and the rules were supposed to support this, and they didn't actually. And that's nothing against Palladium, who are making the system. It's just really, really hard to be able to have characters of different power scales and different types of magic and technology be able to play together. We're trying to future-proof this so that you can be able to have someone in Shardplate and someone whose primary skill is sitting and writing in a notebook be together in an RPG. That was a challenge.
Yeah, that's definitely a tough design brief, and I think one thing we did is we've tried to make sure that heroic characters, what we call the non-invested characters, are what I think we've tried to do that by dialing up their impact in some ways. That being able to sort of inspire somebody with a stirring speech, or being able to come up with a great plan, or being able to talk your way through something can be as narratively important as some of the more obvious kinds of power. And that's played out very nicely. And it also allows for a situation where you can start out in a path like that and be pretty good at a particular thing. You can be somebody who is primarily a soldier or primarily a scholar, and then much later in your career move over to being a Radiant, or snap into becoming a Mistborn. And that character isn't like a level 10 wizard, level 1 fighter, or a level 10 fighter, level 1 wizard. It's really something you don't want to be, right?
No,
you don't multi-class into wizard at 11th level. Whereas here, you could multi-class into an invested character at those level, and because your power level is really based on your character level rather than your class level, that helps smooth out some of those things.
I like that a lot. One of the things we talked about at the beginning that we didn't end up going this direction, but I know it started us in some interesting conversations, was I told you about how I homebrew systems for RPGs. I talked to you about how there's a campaign I ran where every character had to enter as a blank slate. They had lost their memories. They knew nothing about the world. The players knew nothing about the world. And as they encountered things and started going along, like they started to develop a class, which I homebrewed a class dedicated to them based on what they were doing. I can remember you like trying to wrap your mind around that, and we didn't end up using that a lot, but I know that conversation spiraled us into how we kind of approached the idea of different archetypes of a character's life and things.
And we did, that idea, while that's talk about a tough design brief, figuring out how to do that so that people could really shape that from a GM's perspective. We have, however, created what we are calling our level 0 adventure, which is you begin as a blank slate, and as you progress through that adventure, you're asked various questions, and the way that you answer those questions defines a character, so that by the end of that session you have a level 1 character.
Right.
And it's sort of like your idea crossed with a choose your own adventure.
Right. It's a little bit more like the beginning of the Ultima video games. Do you remember those?
Yeah.
You're like, which color do you like the most? And you pick one and like, ooh, that means this. And you basically tarot card your way into a character. But in this, you make decisions, and that leads you in certain paths. And at the end, your character has gotten onto one of these paths.
Yeah, I do think that idea also lives on in just what it's like to be a Radiant. Yeah. So I've had a lot of fun playing this with both people who are familiar with the books and people who are not. And I don't think I've ever actually had an experience as fun as being a GM for people as the spren are just starting to bond them, and where it just becomes this really fun little narrative tool to reinforce when they're doing cool things, like your spren liked that. You're like, oh, it sort of zips around you appreciatively. That's a lot of fun, I think, for everybody involved. Which brings me to another point, which is kind of how we're handling this for different types of audiences. So sort of more experienced gamers versus less experienced gamers, and people who are new to the Cosmere versus big fans. What did you want to see out of us when it came to that?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. We have wide ranges of experiences. One of my challenges to you was that I knew a lot of people who would want to play this RPG would not have played RPGs either ever or had done it very rarely.
Yeah.
I knew that our initial audience for this was going to be people who love my books and love the idea of, I want to sit down with my friends and go to Roshar. And so the system had to be what I always call, what I call fractal. I think I've talked to you before about my idea of fractal world building, where world building is something, a fractal is, one of the attributes is the closer you zoom in on it as a visual fractal, the more detailed it becomes. It's one of the concepts. I mean, I'm not a mathematician. I can't explain to you like the mathematics, but I can talk about that. Like a coastline's a fractal. You start, you zoom in, it gets more and more detailed. Yeah. World building for me is also a fractal, meaning I want you to look at the book and be like, this is Roshar. Giant storm hits every few days. That informs everything. Go. That's really all you need. But the people who dig really deeply can be like, oh, there's this thing that looks like a continuity issue, but then it's explained by this thing that actually reveals things about the world. And then I can dig in deeper and be like, well, what does that mean for the larger implications? And like the closer you look at it, the world building, the more detailed and complex it becomes. And for RPGs, I feel like the best RPGs are like that. You can sit down in an hour, roll up a character and start. But the more that you play, the more you find it can do. And in fact, some systems that are very simple have this. It doesn't mean that you have to have like books and books of rules. It's just the way the game plays and the freedom it gives you and the nuances of what it encourages you to do gets more complex the longer you play.
Yeah, I think one of the ways that we tried to achieve that is with the system of talents that we have. Mm-hmm. So characters level up, and if all you've played in the past is sort of standard D&D, you're not going to be lost. This is it's going to feel very approachable at the beginning stages of this. But once you level up, you can choose a talent, or you can look at one of the other talent trees, and you could be a warrior, or you could multi-path over to scholar or leader or envoy or agent, and each of those you can dig into. I mean, it is kind of like a fractal, those little branching paths, and you don't need to read every talent to know what you're doing. You can take it one step at a time, but if you want to sit there with your books between sessions and go through and pour over that, you can do that. In my experience, I have less time to actually get together with friends and have the gameplay experience. That needs to be streamlined. That needs to be fast. But when I'm leveling up a character between sessions, I want to cherish that experience and like look at all the options and think about what I can do. And I think we've done a nice job. We've borrowed ideas from other systems. We have designers who have worked on systems that bring in some of that same mentality. But I think we pulled that off with this system.
I keep seeing all these figures here and wondering, they seem to be all kind of fighting each other and not any specific nationality or something. I keep thinking we should draft our teams. Who would you pick first if you were going to draft a character?
Well, this character, I have to say, this was one that I have played before. This is a nimble form radiant who I called O'Neal.
Okay.
And he's pretty cool. He was a will shaper.
Okay, so he's your first draft pick.
Yes,
he's top of the top draft pick. Yeah. It's interesting because you see all of these and you're like, you do need these people all to play together. Like, here's Jasna. In the books, Jasna is on this table the clear first draft
Yeah, that's
pick,
true.
right?
Yes, I should have picked Jasna.
But in the system, it should be whoever you want to play as.
Oh.
You can pick unnamed soldier and have that be your character, and you should be able to play, maybe not with Jasna by the place she is in the books, but the beginnings of Jasna.
Absolutely, and I think something that I love about Stormlight in particular, and the reason we started with Stormlight is because this is a world where characters level up, and this is an RPG where character progression is tied to character development. That moments of catharsis and epiphany are the moments that cause you to level up. And there is nothing cooler than when somebody swears an ideal at the table. And we've been doing a lot of Mistborn playtesting right now and playing as different Twinborn, and there's a lot of amazing things there as well. But so far, my favorite Cosmere RPG moment has been when somebody swears an ideal, levels up, they get their investiture refills every turn, so they can just do all of their cool stuff. Every test they make is with advantage, so they roll 2d20 and then pick the higher number. So everything is powered up, and it feels very true to the books, and everybody gets hyped at the table. So where would you like to see us go from here? Not necessarily what's the very next thing that we're going to do after Mistborn, but where would you like to see this system go?
I am looking forward to when we do Silverlight and kind of like the hub of kind of knowledge in the Cosmere and how that looks as an RPG, and how that kind of like and I imagine we'll do at the same time a lot of the smaller things, and maybe even some stories I haven't gotten to yet, where we're like, here's 5 pages on a bunch of different planets that we don't have books in. I'm looking forward to something like that.
That's awesome. Well, and I will say that just like we planned this from the beginning to be compatible for Radiance and Mistborn and Elantrians and regular people who don't have any invested power next to each other, we've also planned for technology to level up. And we're already playtesting guns versus swords and what the mechanics are there. That had a major impact on how we treat armor in this system, actually. But then thinking about starships and things like that, what's cool is we are finding we've built a framework that ties into the rules of how power works, whether that power is coming from magic or from technology, and we've built rules that tie into how investiture works across all of these worlds, and because that's consistent, those things are sort of our through line, our foundation for everything we're doing. All right, well, thank you for talking about this with me, for sitting at the table with me for a little bit here, and we can't wait to share this with all of the readers.